Hi, I'm Zoe Peterson, and this is my Contemporary Business Leader presentation. So, the business leader that I chose is Chief Dave Matafton. He worked for South King Fire in Washington State, and he served for 2 years as the fire chief, 10 years in various chief officer positions, and then he had over 45 plus years of experience in the fire service industry. And so my justification for choosing him is that he's a dedicated and respected leader. He had a long service time in the industry, and he is a public servant. So his greatest career achievement was in 2022 to 2023 when he convinced the Fire Commissioners Board to agree to hiring back all of the firefighters that were fired or forced to quit for refusing to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And the impact of this, he said, was that it allowed those that were terminated or displaced to regain their dignity and be able to support their families. And so the management principles that he employed during this scenario were him trying to educate the commissioners, collaborating with the commissioners, and then getting them to understand and show empathy towards those who had lost their jobs. And then also just being patient, patient with the commissioners, being patient in the entire scenario. And then these were his scores from the leadership characteristics Likert scale, and he scored very high on this. And then a challenge that he had to handle, similar, so before this success, was ultimately having to terminate people for a political reason, that being the COVID-19 vaccines. And this was from 2021 to 2023. And his response to this was he was given a 90-day timeline. Everyone who was not vaccinated was given a 90-day timeline from the commissioner's board and some other King County officials, warning that they would have to comply and get vaccinated, or those who did not were going to be terminated. And they ultimately had a private meeting with the fire chief and were terminated from South King Fire. So, was this managerial or leadership? Um, Chief Matafton exhibited and attempted to handle the situation from a leadership approach by wrestling with the commissioners board and trying to come up with alternative solutions. However, he was ultimately forced to follow those orders, and it ended up resulting in a managerial role. And so he scored a 44 on the servant leadership characteristics for this scenario, which was again very high. So the power bases that were present in this challenge scenario were legitimate power from his position and formal authority as chief, coercive power because he had to enact those punishments, which were the terminations for not complying, and but he also had referent power. He had mutual respect. There was mutual respect between the chief and many firefighters, and he had a lot of agreeable and influential values, especially that of trying to do what's actually right and not just following policy. So the impact of this was that ultimately he did end up having to follow orders, and firefighters were forced to leave the department. But this was after a really long battle and attempt to find alternative solutions with the commissioners board. Um, and ultimately, he ended up meeting those that were forced to leave with empathy and high respect for those that he did have to terminate, which he expressed that he really did not want to do, not only to me, but he expressed that to those that he had to terminate. So the mission, vision, and strategy and entrepreneurial mindset. So he scored very high on the entrepreneurial mindset Likert scale as well. Um, and the mission, vision, and strategy of the South King Fire Department, at its very baseline, is to provide exceptional emergency services to those in need. And they have specific mission and vision statements, but they're kind of consistently updated. They bring in a third party analysis organization to do a whole departmental analysis, and then they come back with the results, and they will base their new mission and visions off of this so that it always keeps it fresh and applicable. And Chief Matafton said that having an entrepreneurial mindset is critical. It's important to always be open to suggestions for change and show a high degree of respect for ideas, just always giving everybody the opportunity to voice their opinions. And so, just some references to back up this entrepreneurial mindset. Entrepreneurial leadership affects the dynamic capability of employees from integrating to development, um, recognizing internal, external resources, and being able to deal with a changing environment. And all this just ultimately allows for the transformation of existing resources to develop new strategies that are ultimately going to better the organization. So, with the application of a leadership theory, I believe that Chief Matafton demonstrated servant leadership in his time as fire chief. And I think that as a member of the fire department, he is by definition a public servant, and he was always looking out for the best interest of the community and how South King Fire could serve and help people best. Um, and this is just demonstrated by kind of the definition of servant leadership, which is just to focus on increased service to others rather than to oneself. And this is namely through um, the employees in the community in his case. And so just kind of some more examples of this from him are that to his firefighters, he always wanted to encourage people to be better and did so by giving them the tools and empowering them. So, an example he gave me was when he was a battalion chief, even on nights that he wasn't on call or on shift, he would tell the crews that they could always call him if they needed anything or needed any backup for anything, and they would never hesitate to do so. And there were times when they called him when they might have been in a little bit of trouble, and he always just met them where they were at and was always there to help and not to punish. He also just had a lot of empathy and respect for all of the other firefighters, specifically during the challenge that was discussed, where he had to terminate firefighters for not receiving a COVID shot. And after a long battle with the commissioners to try to find other solutions, um, there was just no other option from them. He even tried to distribute his over 400 hours of vacation time that he had saved up from his entire career um, and give that out to those at risk of termination to extend their employment and try to find a new solution with the commissioners in the meantime. So the leader that I am choosing to compare Chief Matafton to is Fire Chief Alan Brunacini, who worked for the Phoenix Fire Department and was also just a pioneer of the current national standard on firefighting safety. So he's highly known and respected in the fire service industry. He's created or he wrote many influential fire service books. Namely, one is a textbook called Fire Command, which is still used in fire education and fire service training today. And this just became the standard manual for how to organize and manage emergency service scenes. And then he also developed the Blue Card Command System, which is a practical incident command system based certification and training program for fire officers, which focuses on improving communication, standardization, and safety at fire scenes. And this revolutionarized the fire service leadership and command like it had never been seen before. And then under his leadership, the Phoenix Fire Department became a national model for progressive, compassionate, and effective emergency services. That was really innovative and really ahead of its time compared to many other fire departments across the country. And so ultimately, I found that Chief Brunacini demonstrated transformational leadership. And this is just where you're putting others and organizational goals over a self-interest. So kind of similar to servant leadership, but a little bit more innovation focused and big picture focused. And so transformational leadership, it leads to organizational change and that has a direct effect on positive organizational outcomes. And this was very clearly demonstrated from Chief Brunacini and his revolutionary approaches and creations. So, just some strengths and weaknesses of both leadership styles. With servant leadership, some strengths are that it builds trust and loyalty, um, it increases morale and engagement, it's very community focused and focuses on creating a greater cause, it empowers others, and then it also builds strong team cohesion and trust. And then some weaknesses of this, however, are that sometimes it can lead to slow decision making, depending on the scenario. And then sometimes it can also have less of a focus on long-term vision because it is more service focused in kind of that day-to-day aspect. And then some strengths of transformational leadership are that it's very motivating for others for high performance. It encapsulates a very strong vision and direction. It encourages innovation and creativity. And then it also fosters individual growth and development and is also very effective in change management. However, some weaknesses are that sometimes the vision can overshadow practical needs. So kind of the opposite of servant leadership, it might oversee that kind of day-to-day service base. And then sometimes it can be dependent on the charisma of a leader, kind of how effective it can be. And then alternatively, it can also cause burnout in followers if the goal is a little too relentless or things of that nature. And then it can also be less collaborative if it is overly top down and kind of managerial. So I think three leadership characteristics that lead to success, as Chief Matafton and Chief Brunacini demonstrated, are empowerment, empathy, and innovation and creativity. And I think these traits create a selfless focus and directly work to support others and improve an organization. So, with empowerment, this increases skills, motivation, and creates positive relationships within an organization, which ultimately improves performance and outcomes. And then empathy builds trust and rapport, which is essential to high-performing teams and successful organizations. And then innovation and creativity just encourages and implements novel ideas to continuously keep an organization fresh. And it also opens lots of opportunities to propel that organization. And then just some reflection in choosing these leaders. I chose Chief Dave Matafton because he was an exceptional leader and provided great service to those around him and to the South King Fire Department. And he is also my uncle, and I just have a lot of respect for him and really look up to him. And then I chose Chief Alan Brunacini because he's very infamous in the fire service industry. He is the father of numerous innovations that have been implemented across the country, and are still extremely relevant today. And then he also happened to be a really big role model and friend of Chief Matafton's. And some coworkers and friends of Brunacini said that he set out to make the Phoenix Fire Department a better place to work and to make it a better fire department, and also that he truly loved the fire service and firefighters. He wanted to make the fire service as good as it could possibly be, and he wanted every firefighter to be safe, healthy, happy, and satisfied. And so while these words are about Brunacini, I think that the very same can be said about Chief Matafton and why I find them both to be exceptional examples of not only great leadership, but also success. And that is why I chose to analyze the two of them. And then just some follow-up questions that I asked. I just asked for as much context as possible in certain scenarios and just examples and things like that. And then also just really asked for emphasis on how certain mindsets, strategies, or approaches that were asked in the questions had an impact on the department or outcomes in those scenarios. And then just overall, I learned that leadership isn't always straightforward, and that serious conflicts between managerial duties and doing what's right, can arise kind of despite the fact that you're in a high level position and you might think that you should or would like to have the power to be able to do something else. And then also another big takeaway for me was that just being people focused and striving for how to serve others best will lead to success. And that is my presentation. Thank you.